Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at Bitcoin. It is time for another update, and today we continue our discussion from the previous video where we have been tracking this initial 5-way move to the downside that was strongly suggesting to us that after a 3-wave correction into the area of resistance we should expect at the very least another 5-wave move to the downside. Now it so happens that within this 3-wave correction that followed after the previous video, we have only touched the first level of resistance briefly before this sharp decline had formed. Now, it did fulfill the minimum expectations, cannot really complain there. We did create a 3-wave pattern into the area of resistance, and we did extend within at least another 5-way move to the downside. Now, today we will of course look at the next levels of resistance to watch, but before we get into all those details, all the structures that we need to have our eyes on, I would like to go quickly through the large time frame for any of you who might be new. And here we are tracking what I would consider a quite trivial implementation of the Bitcoin chart, a quite trivial expectation. Yeah, we have here a series of 1-2 setups, and then even this continuation could also be considered technically as a series of 1-2 setups, but we cannot discard the idea of a more substantial wave 1 top being in place here. And this is probably my preferred interpretation because it does not assume the area of support to start too early. I really could see this idea of an internal 1-2 setup work, but honestly, based on the current market conditions, I would not be looking for an accumulation area necessarily on this chart that wouldn't be extremely deep without a signal that a more substantial bottom would be in place. Even within a very small time frame, even maybe on the 1-hour time frame, the 4-hour time frame, yeah, something similar with what we had in the previous video. Now, I would, however, consider a larger area of support, yeah, for the larger wave 2 to look for continuation to higher prices, and here we would be watching the levels between the 31k all the way down to the 7k level. Now, this assumes a more substantial top is in place and we are looking for the larger correction. At the same time, on this chart, we have so many bullish interpretations possible, so many expectations for extensions possible, that I could provide you areas of support all throughout this entire move to the downside. Again, I wouldn't consider them to be too interesting unless we get an internal signal within an internal structure that we should expect a reversal. You know, again, even within a small time frame. But for now, I cannot even really confirm that we have already topped within this wave to the upside, because we have in fact been tracking the idea of an extension within this 5th wave in white. And we have had this idea also in white, but I will be changing this since I find it likely that we have already formed a more substantial top for a couple of reasons. So yeah, I will be tracking this separately in a yellow interpretation. And right now we would still have some room within the area of support for our correction. Yeah, the last level is at the 73k level. We haven't yet gotten there. We also have some additional structural support at this level. And while I'm still open from a larger time frame perspective for continuation to higher prices, at the same time, I find it quite unlikely based on the internal pattern that has formed in this push to the downside. So initially, we were tracking a potential A, B, C structure to unfold. That hasn't necessarily been a very likely structure after we have extended so much in this supposed wave 4 correction. We hadn't significantly broke the area of resistance, it was only a brief break, yeah, nothing sustained, and technically we could have been still looking for this idea to take us to lower prices. But to be honest, it's just quite unlikely in my opinion, and I would rather be prepared for 2 other scenarios, yeah? I'm looking at 2 alternatives on this chart. So either we form a larger A, B, C structure, in which case I would have technically been open for a bottom to form in this wave C and still look for higher prices, but based on the extension we see in only the wave 1, 2, and 3, I would expect this wave C, if it forms the entire 5-wave pattern, very likely to take us below the area of support quite significantly, and yeah, very likely force us to disconsider the larger pattern for continuation to higher prices. Then secondly, if we only form an A, B, C pattern within this area, and we do hold the levels of support, I would, however, need to track this as an initial 5-wave move to the downside, because there is no structure within which I can see at the moment this to be allowed to form a 3-wave move outside of a diagonal structure that would have an initial 5-wave move to the downside within this area and would force me to look for higher prices, sure, but only into the area of resistance before forming at the very least another 5-wave move to the downside. We wouldn't be looking for new all-time highs. Sure, we would be looking for continuation higher prices, potentially into quite high levels, yeah, maybe even into the 115k, something like that. I'm not necessarily calling out levels right now, yeah, we don't even have a bottom, but I would ultimately expect us to have a more substantial top in place. So within this smaller time frame, within both scenarios, I'm looking for a more substantial top to already be in place. This is what I find more likely. Yeah, in the previous video, we were actually looking for a potential direct push to the upside without forming another low within this area. That would have been preferred if we were to manage to extend, but we had this idea of a potential 1-2 setup. We had the area of support for this down to the 84k level. Once we had this broken, it was a strong signal. It was going to take us below the beginning of this entire wave to the upside. It was a strong signal that this extension to lower prices was going to take us much lower. Yeah, we can actually even notice here in the smaller time frame that once we got below this area of support, we retested it from below and extended to even lower prices. Now, this is not applicable anymore. We have completely destroyed this scenario and we are left only with this interpretation in orange. And we had this area of resistance where we were looking with high likelihood for at least another 5-wave move to the downside. But this could have still been within the bounds of the area of support, only we didn't get to push high enough into the area of resistance to even be able to build a clear wave C without breaking the area of support. Now, at the moment on this chart, we are looking for a potential 5-wave move to the downside to build in this structure. Again, I cannot guarantee that it will happen. Only the first 3 waves are the likely parts of any structure. After that, we will of course track an area of resistance for continuation even lower, but currently I would still focus on the actual wave 3. So firstly, let's start with the ideal target. Here we would be watching the 138.2% extension of the wave 1 that is around the 75.6k level. That has been achieved. We have already fulfilled our expectations for a wave 3. We could be looking already for our larger wave 4 correction. I could even provide you an area of resistance for such an idea. Although the thing is, I would expect this wave 3 to take us to even lower prices based on the current structure. Now, again, if it has bottomed, I would need to see a break above the 82.2k level for a signal that this pattern to the downside is complete in an ABC structure, or that we are not going to see this unfold as a wave 3 at all. Yeah, we might see potentially a 1-2 setup, but that has been very unlikely in my experience. Usually if we break in a series of 1-2 setups, the 50% retracement within such a strong movement, we usually don't tend to extend afterwards in an impulse to even lower prices. Now, internally in this structure, I do want to say it is theoretically possible to consider this pattern complete. By the way, we are not focusing on this larger area of resistance, just write down the 82.2k level. A break above the 50% retracement would be a strong signal that we are looking for much higher prices, or at least potentially much higher prices. Now, I will be focusing internally in this structure where I would at the very least still expect another low for this wave 3 to have a clear bottom, yeah? I can track here a potential 1-2, 1-2, third, fourth, and fifth, but then I would still need another fourth and a fifth to have a clearly full count. So at the very least, yeah, I would like at least another low, and I need to go in a very small time frame in this area to actually draw it correctly. And in this area, the area of resistance would shift a little bit lower down to the 81.9k. Nothing substantial, still looking for lower prices. But what I personally find probably even more likely is the idea that the third wave of the third wave had only just bottomed. That this is instead a 1-2, third, fourth, and a fifth. And that we would need several additional 4-5 patterns before we would consider the wave 3 actually complete. So I will instead be focusing on this scenario where my levels of resistance are much lower in fact, and we would have already gotten nearly to the 50% retracement. In this expectation, we would have here this as a third wave complete when we form the next fifth wave to the downside. We would then look for another 4, 5. This would be for this large wave 3. And then if we look into the very small time frame in this area, we can notice a couple of additional 1, 2, 1, 2. We would need this many 4, 5 patterns to consider the entire pattern complete. Ultimately, yes, we are looking still for lower prices. If we break the relevant levels of resistance, we can start to shift our expectations to a more substantial bottom being in place. But for now, I'm focusing on this idea of continued extensions to even lower prices. And for now, these are the levels. This is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover. And I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day and I hope to see you in the next video. And I was trying to actually adjust this to make it more apparent. Yeah, we are watching here the 79.5k level for the last level of resistance for this wave 4. But yeah, I wish you to be safe. Have a nice day. Bye bye.